Hello and welcome to the Okta Workforce Identity Developer Podcast. I'm E. Dunham to computers, Emily to humans, and this season I am joined by Jeff.
Hey everyone, I'm Jeff. I work in product here at Okta, and I'm here with Emily to talk to you about all things, identity and Okta and security. We're really happy to be here, and today we actually just wanted to, basically let you as the audience get to know us. Like, why would you listen to us? What are we doing here? And to really kind of like just, introduce you to like what our mode of thinking is, how we work together, and yeah, and what we're going to talk about over the course of the next few podcasts. All
I
right.
mean, why would you listen to us? Well, I listen to this kind of thing when I would like to be around some people discussing something I'd like to learn about, even if that is virtually, like how you can overhear things and just kind of pick it up. Or if there's a topic that I'm just learning how to talk about in a more educated manner, I find podcasts among people who are closer to it in their roles than I am to be super helpful. So I hope that we can offer a bit of both of those elements of it through this season.
Yeah, and I think that's the same way. I mean, I listen to podcasts for the deep thought, kind of the exposure to new ideas, and a way to kind of just, like I like that, kind of like passively listening to like new ideas just so you can pick up on stuff that's interesting. So hopefully we've got a lot of interesting things for you to hear about. But we wanted to get started and just sort of talk about who we are. So I'll go to you, Emily. Like, can you tell us a little bit about your background?
Yeah, so I am a dev advocate on the workforce side here at Okta. I focus on automation and not necessarily people who are like developers in the I'm building an application from scratch to go directly to the customers kind of sense, but the people who are developers, sometimes inadvertently in the sense of builders, automators, people who just really aren't into having to do things with the mouse and want to make their computers do it for them a bit more reliably than they could. Um, I got here from a background in various DevOps, SRE kind of roles. Did some robotics back in the day, ran a Linux users group for a little while, and so I still have that love of the openness, open source, open standards. So I'm always just delighted when I see us choosing open over proprietary. And I mean, yeah, it's better for the bottom line, but I love seeing how it's better for the bottom line. How about you, Jeff?
Oh, that's great. Before we get to me, I have some questions for you just to hear a little bit more. So can you tell me what was that light bulb moment when you knew that you really wanted to work with code and work with programming?
You know, I don't have like one light bulb moment about that. Um, when I think back to my experiences with programming, I've honestly always been kind of pedantic, kind of argumentative. And when I started realizing how I started programming in robotics in high school, and we were writing C to run a little robot around a track, and that argument where if I could explain what I wanted precisely enough, it would obey. That moment of power of, oh, this will solve my problem for me if I can explain the problem just so. I guess it kind of went to my head, and I've basically been coding ever since.
I see there's a little bit of elements of mad science in here. I like it. And then tell me, like, you've had obviously a really great journey to get here at Okta. Um, what inspired your desire to reach out to developers and like kind of focus on the advocacy track?
Yeah, I got into advocacy when I was doing ops for the Rust programming language. And so it felt like I had somehow infiltrated this compiler team of these just absolutely amazing people who were, it felt like so much smarter than I was. I mean, I am not compiler author kind of smart. There's takes all types and all that, but these just amazing wizard level humans. And then I would share what I was learning with my peers and with my friends from prior workplaces and stuff. And people started saying, oh, you should do a conference talk on that. And so I started speaking on what I was learning that this one group, the compiler authors, thinks is super obvious. And these other groups think is super non-obvious, but really benefits from knowing. And I went, oh, connecting these dots is a whole role unto itself. And that got me started paying attention to advocacy roles. And it wasn't until a few years later that I ended up really aligned with one at a time that made sense to me when it was open and that kind of thing. And I eventually did, though. And that's how I ended up joining Okta in my first advocacy role.
Yeah, that's really great to hear. I mean, I heard a lot of really great things, but I just couldn't get past you're trying to prevent your DevOps work from getting rusty. So I hope
Oh,
it's not going to be like that for the entire. Please, I hope we just haven't lost the entire audience.
no. No,
Anyway,
I've had to kind of go in a different direction with it as far as
oh,
DevOps coding is
oh,
concerned.
well done, choice, chef's kiss. Um, so yeah, and then like tell me, last question here, just like kind of tell me what you're hoping to like give to this podcast. From your point of view, what are the things you feel like you're hoping you can leave our listeners with?
So I'd say there's two things. Um, the thing I would like to bring as a present is my security mindset, where I've been next to the InfoSec community for basically my entire career. And I really respect and admire that way of thinking. And I think I've assimilated a lot of security thought that it turns out isn't just obvious to everybody. So I feel like I'm in a similar situation where I'm realizing, oh, that no, not everyone knows that. Oh, quite a lot of people would like to know that, as I was in Rust when I started sharing all that out. So the security thought is the thing that I would like to bring and help people take away. There's also something I would like to bring and just leave it here on the podcast floor, which is my own ignorance about the strategic depth of a lot of the topics that we cover. Where I think my ignorance may often align with not necessarily ignorance, but perhaps uncertainty that a lot of people in the world happen to have. And so by surfacing that uncertainty and answering those questions, hopefully we can all walk out of here knowing so much more.
I think that sounds great. And again, I've worked with you for a long time now, and just all great things, all the things that some I knew and some I really didn't know. So I'm looking forward to this journey together.
Yeah. How about you? How did you get here?
So I started out in tech support, and I really just gotta love working with customers. And well, in tech support, you kind of like learn to love the customers at kind of like not necessarily their lowest point, but at the point where they have the most challenges, let's say. And so that actually inspired me to think beyond just how I could support, you know, tactical fix issue one, two, and three and beyond, and then start to think holistically. So I ended up getting the opportunity at the company that I was at where I could, I pitched an idea for a new product, ironically working with Blackberries. So obviously had all the future in mind. But it actually turned out to be a really, really useful product that ended up becoming its own business line. Um, and so from there, I just like that was like my love of product. I was really bold in asking for my first product job, and I got it. And they said, you know what? You're so good, we're going to put you as far away from the interfaces as possible. So I got to deal mainly with backend, and that's what starts that developer journey. I should also add that while I was in support, to make my job easier, like I love the concept of lazy developers and lazy PMs. Not that they're lazy, but they end up like really just shaving away what's not important. I was the same way. I really like to program stuff so I could solve a problem once, and then when the issue came back, I could just run my code and it would up my numbers and everything. But I learned how to program there. And actually, some of those fixes were ended up adopting in some of our later programs. So I really just loved solving problems. I mean, I guess you could summarize it as that. And then I ended up working on a mobile identity solution, got the love for the entrepreneurial spirit. We were pitching to a lot of different companies. That folded, and then I came to the West Coast to work in financial services, where again, in the same entrepreneurial spirit, I said, give me a little bit of money and let me build an entire e-commerce service on microservices. And I didn't really have a good idea of how it could be done, but I understood the theories that I read from Netflix, and we ended up building a really great, reliable platform. So I was able to do that, and then I thought, you know what? I really have loved developers at this point. I wanted to take that to the next level and see, like, could I take these ideals that I put into this small team and extrapolate it across a wider developer community? And that's when Okta came along and said, hey, we've got this developer experience program. Uh, I was like, yeah, I'm in totally. Like, get me in on the ground floor. I'd love to make this successful. And, the rest is history, as they say. I've really kind of become an internal champion for all the types of builders on the Okta platform, and am now working with our integrators. So that's my little story about coming to Okta.
Yeah, internal champion is a fantastic way to put it. It's the kind of buzzword that anyone would want on their resume, but if you actually ask me to describe how Jeff's work ends up playing out within the org, I'd be hard pressed to find a better term. Just the number of people that I've been in calls with had no idea they knew you, and they go, "Oh, I'm going to have to ask Jeff Taylor about that," is incredible. You really have this reputation for being extremely data driven, really able to connect the impact on the bottom line to these improvements in developer quality of life.
Yeah, I think that's just like, I mean, I love challenges. I mean, even when anytime I have talked to companies, I'm like, what is a big thing that you're trying to do? And the bigger the better, the less known the better. I love the challenge of making that work. And again, yeah, using the data to help inform the decisions, balancing the qualitative and quantitative data, but all it's about just finding the right signals and how we can actually solve something.
Yeah, and so to reflect your own question back at you, do you have that light bulb moment of when you kind of got it and realized that coding was your thing?
I do. I'm a little hesitant to share because it just means that I'm really old. Like I,
Well, you
I
were telling us
just
about working on Blackberries a minute
yeah,
ago,
that's true. Yeah, that
so
is true. Um,
it is okay. We value everybody.
yeah. Well,
You're wise.
in high school, I loved to play this game on the graphing calculator called Ski.
Mhm.
Some of you may remember it. It's like literally just, I think it was degree markers with a V moving down a path. And it dealt a lot with like for loops and labels inside of TI-82. I don't even know if it was assembly or whatever the language was called. I don't even remember at that point. But I remember like being learning how to hack the game so that I could get the high score. And that was like when I started to realize, I think sort of along the lines of you, is that, well, if I know how to make the instructions, I can control how the platform behaves. And I just started tinkering from that moment on. I had the ability to take a number of computer science classes. Like I argued, I tell people that when I was in college, I studied religious studies, but I got the certificate that said, "Man, you've taken a lot of classes in our engineering school." And so I just had it as a hobby, and so I was faced with a decision. I'm either gonna become a religious studies doctorate candidate, or I'm going to make my way in tech. And the universe said, you know what, let's try tech out. And I've been happy ever since.
Yeah, and with a career trajectory like that, going from religious studies to tech support to ultimately product management in charge of a pretty large program here, do you have career advice for people who might want to follow in your footsteps?
Yeah, like I think the biggest thing is, do what you love. Like find the passions. I think anyone that knows me knows that, I mean, you'll see this on this podcast. I get really passionate about these things. And it makes me want to trade my time for this work. And I think that's really the key. It's like you could just do those things that really help you find joy. and solve really big problems. I mean, you're making your mark based on the people that you interact with and the problems that you solve and the things that you can deliver, the tangible things that you can deliver. So that's my advice. Like just keep charting your path, keep focused on your path, and everything's gonna work out.
Yeah, and you've been on a trajectory where you were in the identity space for a bit, moved out of it, and then came back to it. Is there something special about that identity space that really speaks to you?
Yeah, and even like even as I took my hiatus from identity, one of the services that I had to build for this e-commerce solution was an identity and authentication service for consumers. So it was actually like building auth. I know don't tell our Auth0 people, but I was actually kind of building my own auth. But actually I came to that same conclusion. I loved identity. I love the fact that the entry point that we have to get in, we can protect. And we can actually like bind to what our users expect as the ways that they need to get in. And there's interesting tension. You know, company or an application needs to protect the data and their users. The users have an expectation about how they can log in consistently and reliably. And it's interesting to see those things play together. And I've always loved it, but I've always said, you know, it gets really hairy when you're starting to develop policy like around passwords and whatnot, and you're trying to step lightly on what security is trying to drive. And so I like being now in this ability where in this position where I can advise our customers, I can walk them through the marriage of like business processes transitioning over to these identity solutions and working with the different kind of restrictions and requirements that they have to make their users and resources secure.
Yeah, and calling it a marriage makes it sound, in that metaphor, like you're more of a counselor in a way between these very conflicting needs, between the business needs, the security needs that funnel into the business needs, the user desires that funnel into those business needs, because they all kind of start out pointing different directions, and reconciling them can be a challenge of itself.
Yeah, and I think that's an interesting way that you put it because it's one of the things that I say when making our customers feel like comfortable to express like what their doubt is like sometimes you do have to put a counselor or a therapist like let somebody vent, talk about what they don't like candidly. That's some of the most valuable feedback that you can get for an application, a process, or even a product feature. So having that ability for customers to freely speak is extremely important for us to listen and pivot or deliver great feature enhancements on top.
Yeah, one thing that we've talked about at other times is how code is this model of the physical world, but then identity as a problem space becomes this model of the social world in pretty interesting ways.
Yeah, and I think it goes a little bit beyond like the model of the social role. I think as far as the construct that you're creating, it makes a lot of sense. But I also think just as you're saying, like computer science is about digitally modeling the physical world. It's the only engineering where we put our own constraints on top of the code that we write. So we're building like our own physics, our own universe within that code base. I think the same goes for identity. It's like really we're trying to like model who we are with a lot of digital representations. And again, like there's a huge social aspect in that that plays out as you get deeper into the advanced levels of the definition. But I think it's like just fascinating. We need security because there's identity and because we can't like just transfer directly into our computer where we've got a full makeup of like how people would recognize us on the street. Like that the computer has to turn that into ones and zeros to actually make a determination of who we are, and we've got all these like fancy peripherals and all these added things that are figuring that out for us. So yeah, it becomes like this real fascinating, like philosophical, I would say, like this Isaac Asimov, like futuristic concept of how we can actually make these digital representations of our physical selves.
Yeah, and you talk about recognizing each other on the street. I hope the computer does better than I can because I'm pretty terrible at faces. Like, I get the hang of how someone's hair looks or how they move, and then I learn how to recognize humans. But if you just show me a picture of a face in isolation, I'm probably doing way worse than a transformer model at this point.
It's one of those like most horrifying concepts where you like tap somebody on the shoulder, you're like, "Hey, old friend, whoa, I don't know who you are," right? Like, and it's interesting to say that the computers might even be better at facial recognition than we are with each other. You know.
Yeah, and they're definitely better at recognizing word for it. The stuff that we provide, the challenge and response.
The
Yes,
factors
the
are, yeah, the
factors
factors are
or
challenging.
just the way that we implement identity for our digital systems has a whole lot less room for error because we've gotten to architect it from the ground up. And by we, that's the really big we of humanity and our standards committees.
No, I think that's a very, very good and fascinating point. So, what do we expect to cover this season on this podcast?
So this season, we are splitting up the identity space because it is a huge space, and we're going to focus on integrators, the people and organizations who build software that needs to talk to identity providers like Okta or like our competitors. Um, as long as we're all on open standards, we don't really care if you're building for us or for anywhere else. We just want to help you build these integrations that will make life better for our shared users.
Well, that sounds great, but it feels like I might be on the hook for at some point shouting integrators, 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 integrators. I hope it doesn't come to that, but if it does, we'll see where the podcast takes
I
us.
mean, you're allowed. Could be
It's
a bit
true.
shoutier. Do it with about 20% more enthusiasm if I'm gonna prompt you like I'd
Yeah.
prompt some systems.
Yeah. No, it reminds me of just the old 90s sitcoms. We'll enhance the shouting 20%. We'll
Enhance,
enhance, enhance,
enhance,
enhance. Yeah.
yeah. Which I think the developers meme has made it sufficiently far in the group consciousness that people will get that one.
I think so too. I mean, and if not, it
Something
is
about a
just
link to the
ridiculous.
original in the
Yeah,
description. Surprise perks of watching the podcast. Classic vintage memes.
that's true. Yeah, I mean, we are going to appeal to what we have here. So yeah, like I mean, I think the other thing too, like to bring us back a little bit, is like really talking about how all of these things kind of work together. Like I said, we hope that you're going to get more in-depth discussion about why these things are important, coming from us that are working in the identity security space, and really kind of giving not like a realistic, I wouldn't say like a realistic view, but a view between two humans talking about things that will come across probably in the course of your fiscal years or your daily life, as we want to like make sure that you have a good understanding. If you hear some terminology, you can respond with some confidence and some depth of knowledge, and even learning about when you're seeing maybe a new task at hand, you're like, oh yeah, I remember they were talking about this, and I do think this is going to be an impactful feature that I get to work on. Which, again, I think that's an important thing to know, that you're developing something that will fundamentally safeguard your customers and their users.
Yeah, and even just getting you asking the right questions when you have to choose something, whether it's a protocol or an identity provider, or just do we want to do embedded auth or redirect auth? If you've heard people talking about them, you kind of get this assimilation of this ranking where it's like, yeah, that one's good, but the other one's better. This one is still around because it was awesome in its time, but its time was 10 years ago. These kinds of ultimately more social insights into how we, as the people who build the technology, the people who use the technology, relate to it, and how the people who are building it are hoping that the users are going to relate to it as well. Like, what are these expectations? Who are they assuming you'll be in order to interface with it through that path of least resistance?
Yep, and additionally, as Octonauts, and as this being an official Okta podcast, we are going to take you through some of the relevant news, with what's going on at Okta as well. Like, what's Okta, up to? I don't, not like it's like an uncle that's up to something, but no, just as like what's going on here, from our perspectives. Hopefully, taking you through some of the relevant news as Okta makes its way through its calendar year this year. We hope that you'll be able to find some insights into what we're working on, what's recently been released, and maybe even what we're doing at some of the conferences that are out there.
Yeah. And I think that even if you're not necessarily an Okta customer, maybe not an Okta integrator yet, or you might not be even be planning on it, then looking at what is Okta getting up to and why, what's going on in the ecosystem that made this the best choice for a leader in identity can be really revealing.
Yeah, and if you're technically curious, taking deeper dives into what those things actually are. Again, you know, passively listening, something piques your interest. There's a lot of materials out there, and everyone's doing. I mean, I think this is a fascinating time for identity and identity related industries. There's so much focus on protecting our accounts and whatnot, and there's a lot of new companies that are coming in to really make this like an easier experience for their customers. So yeah, this is like a pretty exciting time, I think, to be talking about these things in depth and exploring what's new out there. So yeah, hopefully there
Yeah.
will be a lot to enjoy.
I mean, when you say what moment in history was 2025, in like the history textbooks in 20, 30, 40 years, if we still have history textbooks then, the headlines are going to be about AI. But it doesn't exist in a vacuum. It gives people skills, powers, abilities that used to be available to very few or no people, and it suddenly democratizes these abilities to do good things and also these abilities to do bad things like impersonating others more convincingly. And ultimately, security in the computer sense means letting the right people do the thing. And in order to do that, it all relies on identity as a very foundational element. Like, there's that joke about how the only secure server is the one that you power off, encase in concrete, throw in the lake, but that's also got the worst uptime.
It's true. That is very true. Yeah, those are like the teenage angst in me is rising when I hear that because it's like, okay, yeah, like the safest code is the code that's never written. That just doesn't really it's not really realistic, right? So we have to come up with
We
better.
want the safest good code that solves our
That's
problems.
right. That's exactly right. So I think there's a lot in the possibilities that are out there. Um, and I think there's so much opportunity around AI. And I do want to state this is probably not going to be your like deep dive AI podcast every single session, but I will say AI does introduce an interesting complexity across the whole
Identity
IAM
landscape. Oh,
ecosystem.
I am. Yep.
You.
Identity and access management.
There we go. That's an acronym we need to define as well. But how we can safeguard the access and the ability to guardrail these AI solutions, how we can protect ourselves to make sure we're getting all the value without the vices of this is another important concept that we want to explore. And I know that this is going to be top of mind for a lot of you. So there's the AI soundbite. It's there, you know. But I said like it's going to be important for us to discern the AI agents. There's going to be a rise of these AI agents. I even told somebody as I was looking at what are these relevant use cases. Like, could you imagine doing an expense report where you just gave an agent access to your credit card statements and your receipts or even like your phone for taking pictures? And it just when you return home because it knows where you land with its location, it says here's your expense report.
Yeah, I think
How,
some
how
vendors are already doing that.
I
Yeah.
know it's like, but how amazing is
Yeah.
that? But also, how scary is that, right? And so, like, how do we know? And even as an organization, how do I know that none of my corporate cards or corporate accounts are going to be compromised with this AI agent delivering so much value to the end user?
There's also a flip side of the whole AI question where we're currently a vast majority of those of us who access these agents and everyone who accesses the really powerful ones is going through web interfaces of some kind, whether it's a chat UI or an API. And once in a while, we see these very prominent organizations mess something up in their identity security implementation
Yeah.
in a way that suddenly all of the data that individuals have shared with them might become world readable. And that's something we would like organizations to have less of.
Yeah, I
Just
think
as
that
a person who likes personal
mm,
privacy, like I would like to live in a world where we don't just dump everyone's chat histories online. That would be very nice.
exactly. Very well put. Lots of exciting topics ahead. So we hope you'll join us. You'll enjoy us. You'll also, give us feedback, leave comments. We didn't get into this space because we wanted to just talk at people. We want to connect as well. So please feel free to let us know if there's any other topics that are relevant to your identity and access management or IAM journey that you'd love to hear about.
Yeah, let us know in the comments. If the comments are off on a platform, then the little blurb that goes along with the podcast will have a link to the Okta Developer Forum where you can get help with your podcast questions or with other questions about integrating with our product.
Well, thank you, and we'll see you next time.
See you next.